I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, this is the Subaru Outback XT Touring, and this is the latest in my series of videos on the new turbocharged Outback. And today we're going to be focusing on the XT Touring, which is the top of the range Outback here in Australia. It's about $61,500 on the road, and in today's video I'm going to tell you why this is actually the best Outback to buy. I know it's easy for me to just say, why don't you just go and buy the most expensive Outback? But in this case, it's actually true because this is a very complete vehicle. Now, already on the Chasing Cars channel, you can find a really detailed video that we've done comparing the fuel economy in the real world between the turbo Outback and the non-turbo Outback. And in that video, I debunked the myth that the turbocharged Outback costs you more to run than the naturally aspirated version, because it doesn't. But that was the Outback XT Sport, which is more of a lifestyle-orientated vehicle. This is the XT Touring, which is quite a posh, upmarket Outback, and it actually makes a really brilliant case for itself at the price that Subaru is charging here in Australia. We're going to dive into all of those issues. We're going to check out the interior, the boot, we'll talk about the running costs, we'll take it for a drive and see how it goes on the road, and a little bit of light off-roading like this as well. Before we get started though, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let's crack on with it. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by My test car today is finished in Sapphire blue outside, which, like all Outback colors, is actually no cost. And Subaru lets you choose so many colors for the Outback. I think that's one of the best things about Subaru, is that they actually give you a bunch of choice. If it was me though, I'd probably go for the autumn green, the brown, or the dark gray. But certainly inside, one thing I would do is I would go for the two-tone beige and black Nappa leather. Now this car has just the black Nappa. This is actually one way that Subaru has improved the touring grade of the Outback since the SGP Outback came out. When it launched, it just had standard leather. It was a little bit slippery and it didn't have cooling. That got swapped out very early in the piece for much softer, really nice Nappa grade leather with both heating and cooling and electric adjustment and lumbar. So you're sitting on a nice soft premium feeling seat with a good amount of adjustment. Now, the driving position in the Outback is quite a bit higher than in a normal car. Subaru does say this is an SUV. I think we can all see that it is a raised station wagon with cladding, which is possibly the best segment of car on the market, in my opinion, combining the aesthetics of a station wagon with a bit of extra ground clearance and some plastic cladding to protect the paint. Sounds absolutely perfect to me. We have a leather steering wheel here, not quite as nice grade leather as the seats, it must be said. And we look past that steering wheel, which has clickier, recently updated buttons, quite nice. We look through that steering wheel at possibly the most dated part of the Outback's interior, and that's a set of analog gauges with a tiny little trip computer screen in between them. Now, it all works. There's no problem at all with the operation of it, but compared to the Volvo and the Volkswagen in this segment with their fully digital cluster with driver customization options, it just looks a little old school. Thankfully, the Outback kind of counters that with a big vertical touchscreen over here, which has been upgraded to wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. That all works absolutely rock solid, and it's paired to a Harman-Kardon premium stereo in the Touring, which sounds pretty good. It's not the last word in premium stereos, but it's an incremental bump over the acceptable base stereo. It sounds fine. Plus, we have hard buttons for your temperature, a volume knob, a tuning knob. But if you want to change the fan speed, the heated or cooled seats, that's all soft buttons through the touchscreen. But at least they're all there all the time, so you're not losing them in menus and stuff like in some other cars. And then this rather kind of Blade Runner-y thing above the screen is actually the driver monitoring system. It follows your eyes and makes sure that they're always on the road. And if they're not, it gets angry at you. But you can turn that off. But I don't tend to turn that off because I think having your eyes on the road is a pretty good thing. Looking further afield, we've got our shifter for the CVT auto down here. I'll get into the CVT a little bit later. Big cup holders, clever little tray ahead of the shifter that hides your phone from your eyes, which is good. Another tray over here for the front passenger. Big dual level box between the seats as well. We've got big bottle holders in the doors too. And material quality, it's pretty good. It's a little thin down here where your leg kind of bumps up against that transmission tunnel, but that's slim pickings. All in all, the interior feels pretty nice and about right at this 61 grand level. The The Outback is, I guess, best regarded as a bit of a big car for a big country. It isn't a three-row vehicle, it's not an SUV, it's a wagon, and that means that it has a big second row seat. Now you can get 3 adults in here if you need to, but it's a very generous car when used as a 4-seater. You can see for myself at 6 foot, headroom is awesome, legroom isn't bad, tow room is pretty good. One weird quality issue on our tester here is that the headliner is a little bit mottled back here actually. It's sort of like it needs to be stretched a bit more or something, but I've certainly seen worse than this. But in terms of amenities, we've got air vents back here, heated rear seats, more USB charging ports, dual map pockets, all that soft touch material, plus a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders. They're extremely shallow, so if you put a big coffee in there and then old mate up here gets on the brakes, that coffee is going to end up in the air vent, which is not great. In terms of the seat, they're not on rails or anything. They don't recline any further than this, I don't think. Oh. In terms of the seat themselves, they're not on rails, though they do recline a bit further, which is good because in their default position, they actually feel a little bit upright. But at least when they're upright, you're certain that the people seated back here are getting a good view out the window. Visibility is good. That's going to help abate car sickness as well. So that's the back seat, reasonably good. Let's check out the boot now. Coming around the back of the touring grade of the turbocharged Outback, and you'll notice immediately there's quite a bit of chrome around here compared to the sport model where the badges and a few other bits and bobs outside have like a dark grey matte finish. If you go for the touring, you are getting more bright work. It is the fanciest version, so that does make sense. Also, this one has a tow bar, which is relevant because the turbo is rated to tow 2,400 kilograms with a 240 kilo tow bar limit. Now we will be testing this on the channel. I'll be testing this in 2 days time, so make sure you hit subscribe because that video will come out after this one. So to see the Outback Turbo tow test, you're going to need to subscribe to the channel. That should be fun. Opening the power tailgate, I reflect on the fact that this car's main competitors can only tow 2,200 kilos. So there you go. Now, the boot opens up, it reveals a good amount of space. The actual literage is on screen now, but it's a big square space. Low loading height, a lot lower than many mid-size SUVs, so quite easy to load suitcases and stuff in here. Under the boot floor, you do get a full-size spare wheel of the same type that's already sitting on all 4 corners, which is great peace of mind. You've got a cargo cover here. It does that thing where it can go up and sit like that, so you can kind of get at your stuff, but they still have privacy. You've also got, actually let's get rid of this now. You've also got the ability to flip down the rear seats automatically from right here in the boot. That goes straight through. Huge amount of boot space in the Outback, plus controls here to close the boot or close it and lock the vehicle, which is nice and practical. When it comes to running costs, of course, the biggest concern on people's minds when it comes to the Turbo Outback is going to be the idea that the turbocharged engine is going to use a lot more fuel. Now, we've already spoken about fuel consumption for the Turbo Outback on the Chasing Cars channel. Make sure you catch the direct comparison of the turbo and non-turbo versions so you can see all of my working out. But we've tested the fuel consumption of this car at the Bowser rather than relying on the trip computer, which is a little bit optimistic actually in the Subaru Outback. And what we found is that on the open road, the turbo uses about 8.2 litres per 100 Ks. That's over hundreds of kilometres of testing. Whereas in town, you can expect somewhere between 10 and 11 litres per 100 Ks. Now that's competitive. That's exactly the sort of fuel consumption that you're going to get from the Volvo V60 Cross Country. That is a bit more frugal on the highway, and the Volkswagen Passat Alltrack 162 TSI, also a little bit more efficient on the highway than this car, but they all use about the same amount of petrol in town. Now, with the XT, it does require at least 95 octane premium petrol, so you have to factor that in, but the fact it's actually a bit more frugal than the non-turbo Outback still all works out in the wash. Now, in terms of servicing, this car costs just under $2,600 over 5 years and 75,000 kilometers of servicing. It's about 3.4 cents per kilometer. In terms of insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $943 to comprehensively insure a new Subaru Outback. Everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage the car, and your driving history. And the warranty on this baby is 5 years with unlimited kilometers. So what is the turbocharged version of the Subaru Outback Touring like to drive? Well, the Subaru Outback very much has its own persona when it comes to driving dynamics. And that's a very good thing, because where Subaru has landed with the current generation Outback is really good for touring out here in Australia. And that is a relatively big, relatively soft and plush vehicle that still has reasonable levels of body control and handling capability for when you do find yourself on a country road, like what our private test track here at Chasing Cars aims to replicate. Now, all of those virtues were already there in the existing Outback. The turbocharged engine has increased the capability of this car in key ways. It's a relatively simple changeover. We of course have that new engine, 2.4 litre turbocharged flat 4 engine from the WRX model, which is a nice little change in terms of boosting the performance. But the Outback also has some retuned geometry on the front end for that new engine, and also effectively a heavy duty rear suspension to help with the 2400 kilo towing upgrade. And all of those things put together not only make this a faster car, unsurprisingly, than the non-turbo Outback, but they also make it a more stable car. So in various ways, the XT is the best Outback dynamically. Now, of course, you can choose the XT in the sport grade or in the more premium touring guise like we've got here, but it's the touring that just feels like the more complete car on so many levels. And that's not really down to the dynamics, because this car has the same suspension tune, the same wheel size, the same tyres as the Outback Sport, but you're just more comfortable in the cabin sitting on better chairs, softer chairs, with cooling, under a sunroof, and with premium audio. It all feels a cut above in the touring. But the dynamics of this car are actually quite polished. So let's start with the engine. Now, a lot of people have already pointed out in the comments to our Outback Touring videos on Chasing Cars that Australia does not get the full fat turbocharged Outback tune, and that's correct. Our tune is wound back slightly compared to what the Americans get and compared to what the WRX has in Australia. There are various theories on why this is. Maybe it's to give the WRX wagon a slight edge, but honestly, in the real world, it doesn't really matter, because the current gen Outback Turbo is no performance car anyway. So the tune that we do get here with 183 kilowatts of power and 350 Newton meters of torque is enough. It's good enough to sprint from 0 to 100 from our independent testing in just under 7.5 seconds. And that puts it in a comfortable territory that is maybe a touch slower than key rivals like the Passat Alltrack 162 TSI or the Volvo V60 Cross Country B5, but it's certainly quick enough to get out of its own way. And certainly the rolling acceleration when you're merging onto a freeway or overtaking somebody on a country road is much, much quicker than the non-turbo Outback, and is generally sufficient in this car. You always feel like you have enough power to do what you need to do. Unfortunately, the brakes have not copped an upgrade in the same direction. The Outback's braking in current gen form has never been that good. There are plenty of SUVs that do better than this wagon in terms of braking, and it's about time Subaru got a little more serious on the braking performance front with this car. But when it comes to the ride and handling, the Outback unabashedly is tuned towards the comfort end of the spectrum, but it doesn't relinquish all body control, which is about the right mix. So certainly you'll feel that it's soft and insulating over bumps. In terms of all that urban stuff like potholes, expansion joints, patchy concrete roads, sort of stuff we do experience a lot here in Sydney, the Outback just makes light work of all of it. It makes your commute that much more relaxing. It makes road tripping quiet and relaxing and comfortable. And that's pretty much what most people should want out of their family car. Certainly if you go for the Volvo or the Volkswagen, you're going to get a bit more of a dynamic vehicle, more keen handling, but you are sacrificing some ride quality in order to get there. The Outback is more comfy riding than both of those cars. That said, it will turn into a corner. Turn-in's okay. Handling is decent in the Outback. I wouldn't go as far as to call it particularly interesting or engaging to drive from a handling perspective, but it'll hustle. It'll do it. It's got a nice stiff platform. The Subaru Global platform underpins this model. It's got the Bridgestone Lenza crossover tyre, which is a half decent tyre. It's the same as you get on a BMW X3 or on a Toyota RAV4, and it does the job fine, and it's also a nice quiet tyre. So certainly you can push on in the Outback if that's what you want to do, but this car absolutely rewards just graceful driving. It's a pleasant vehicle to get the job done on your commute or on a road trip. The fuel economy isn't particularly great, nor is it particularly outrageous, but it's also super quiet. In terms of safety, you've got Subaru's EyeSight suite, so we've got fairly zealous safety tech in this car. Adaptive cruise, lane keep assist. It does get quite cranky when you get close to a line. Too cranky, I found, so I kind of turned it off most of the time because it was really annoying me. We've got blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, reversing AEB, all of that stuff works really well. You do have a reversing camera and side cameras, though it doesn't plot the vehicle with a 360-degree camera like a satellite view, which is what you get in most rivals. That would also be a nice upgrade for the Outback in future. I think it is interesting to note though that here in Australia and around the world, the only engine options for the current generation Outback are the base 2.5 non-turbo or this new 2.4 turbo, which is definitely an upgrade for the car, but you can't get a hybrid Outback or an all-electric Outback, and I think both of those powertrain choices would actually be a really logical upgrade for the Subaru Outback in future. This car has that kind of outdoorsy, pleasant sort of image to it, and I think a lot of people that are considering an Outback would like the idea of a reasonably powerful hybrid version of this car, and in future I think an electric Outback also makes heaps of sense. You know, it's a relatively big car, it's got the space to absorb a big battery, and you know, even more silent and torquey motoring will help. Now, of course, the other promise of the Outback is that it does actually have some off-roading capability, at least what I would sort of deem moderate trail ability. Now, we have a little bit of that sort of work here at our test track. We have even more heavy-duty stuff that we use to test Land Cruisers and dual cabs, and that's not the sort of terrain that I would choose to test the Outback on, moguls and stuff, because ultimately it's a unibody platform. It doesn't have a huge amount of articulation, but for moderate trail work, we've got okay ground clearance. We've got half reasonable approach and departure angles, especially for this segment. One thing the Outback does have that some rivals don't is actually pretty good ground clearance. So you'll get this thing over more rocks and obstacles than you will in one of the lowest slung raised wagons, and also plenty of mid-size SUVs do not have this level of clearance. You've also got Subaru's symmetrical all-wheel drive system, and we've got X mode in this car as well, which particularly helps with your downhill driving. But the Outback's going to find a little bit more purchase, a little bit more traction, where other SUVs and wagons are going to start giving up. But of course, you are limited by the clearance, by the articulation, and especially by the tires. That being said, you don't have to spend too long online browsing Subaru Facebook groups and forums to find some people, especially in America, who do some really, really cool Outback builds, and they lift these cars, they chuck them on proper mud terrain tires. So you just touch down the front end there. Why we need that clearance lift. Stick on some spotties and turn this thing into a proper overlander, and with the turbo engine, it'll get you pretty far as well. The thing about the new turbocharged Subaru Outback is that it's just a really difficult car to fault. It is one of those vehicles that is just pleasant to spend time with. Is it sporty? No. Is it comfortable? Heck yes. This car is relaxing to drive, it's soft, it's comfy, it's compliant on the road, and yet it doesn't all fall apart when you do have to hustle it down a country road. For that reason, I think the Subaru XT Touring is just one of those cars that would be a lovable member of the family for years to come. The kind of car that you'll hand down. That is what happens with a lot of vehicles like the Outback, like the Volvo Cross Country, like a Volkswagen Passat wagon. They are lovable family cars. All of them deserve consideration, so you should test drive widely. But when it comes to the Outback, if you're going to go for one of the turbo models, I think the Touring acquits itself really well. Those cooled Nappa seats, the better stereo, it's just the creature comforts you're going to want if you plan to keep this car for a long time. And I think the price at 61.5 grand drive away is quite fair. If there was something missing from the Outback range, I think it's a turbo version of the base model, which would give it a nice, cheaper entry point as well. Very keen to know your opinion, so let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.